Well, it's getting messy. Sure, it's an allegation still under investigation as conceded by National Top Cop Fannie Masemola, but his current deputy Shadrack Sibiya stands accused of being in cahoots with Gauteng's criminal underworld, most notably Vusimusi, Matlala.
Now, through the mouth of our National Commissioner of Police, he's essentially said he and Khumalo, General Dumisani Khumalo, who himself is facing charges over the allegedly corrupt appointment of a 29-year-old BMW employee to a very senior position within crime intelligence, allegedly utilizing a faked CV, that they were the people that went to Nkunu and said, we believe that, Shadrack Sibiya is potentially associating with and implicated and linked to this alleged criminal syndicate activity. And of course, we haven't had any evidence to substantiate that.
Catch all the main talking points from week 2 of the Madlanga Commission in Pretoria with specialist legal journalist Karyn Maughan next. Later in the show, some Mpumalanga schools are forced to make thousands of costly photocopies of old textbooks to teach pupils. And finally, Thabo Mbeki's booting from office is remembered with On This Day in South African History, courtesy SA History Online.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
Thanks so much for tuning in to The Lead. Listen to now more than 650,000 times since March this year. You can rate us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify and YouTube, and hit like, follow and subscribe to stay tuned for our next edition. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, this is The Lead, and this is the South African story. Moving to our top story today, it's day 4 of the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry with our second witness on the stand, National Police Commissioner Fannie Masemola, who since insisted that the decision to disband the contentious political killings task team was quote-unquote unlawful. Well, that's not all. Masemola told the inquiry in Pretoria today that he received a tip-off that now-incarcerated tender Don Vusimusi Matlala was acting like as if he was one of these police deputies taking liberties with his alleged illegal connections to the force itself. Specialist legal journalist Karyn Maughan is joining me live now from Pretoria to detail the very latest. Karyn, how are you doing? And it's great to hear from you.
Thanks for having me. And excuse all the noise in the background because we're still in the auditorium where the hearing is taking place. Lots of journalists talking in the aftermath of what's just happened.
Yeah. Masemola, he started off, and let's go through the chronology of today's events. He started off by sort of appreciating the merit of the commission, that it's an opportunity for accountability in the police force in South Africa today, right?
No, absolutely. And he said, it was his opportunity to give his account of his engagement with the Minister of Police specifically, but also for, possible reform within the police service, that this was something that he wanted to participate in as the National Commissioner, as someone who had a powerful position under the law in the police. And he really wanted the opportunity to give evidence and possibly contribute to, the thinking on those potential reforms.
Moving on, right off the bat, came the issue of the now suspended Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, who's currently on gardening leave, the fateful decision to thus disband the political killings task team. Masemola initially called it encroachment, but later on sort of started using words like him believing that it was unlawful.
Well, this is a key issue for this inquiry because under the law, under the Constitution, there is this is what this commission is examining, is the minister has power in terms of dictating policy, but the National Commissioner has power in terms of how that policy is implemented, the operation. So, there was this example that was given about if the minister, for example, decided that cash in transit heists needed to be a priority for the police. He could absolutely make that determination, but it would be the National Commissioner who said, well, how do we make that happen? Who are we putting in the positions? How are we going to work that? He made it, Masemola said, it wouldn't be appropriate, it wouldn't be legal, it wouldn't be lawful for the minister, for example, to say, well, you must do an operation at this time, or these are the people who must be on the task team that I want appointed to deal with a specific issue. And the reason that, Graeme, this is so important is because there is there was an admission a concession which ultimately came back to haunt Masemola in sort of the last hours of this hearing, that it was, on his version, an unlawful instruction by the minister to disband the PKTT, the Political Killings Task Team, that he did not have that power and he should not have done it.
Yeah, because he got sort of grilled quite a bit on, following through, if you will, on the minister's decision, is sort of instilling that, he found himself sort of like an island on his own, that his only sort of recourse would then go to the presidency, not to follow through on what the minister had instructed him, right?
Yes, but I mean, the problem for him is I don't think the commission was accepting that. Mbuyisile Matlanga, numerous times, it was one of the most protracted questioning sessions on this specific issue, because he said to him, and remember there was this concession right in the beginning, that an instruction to disband in a general sense would be unlawful. And then, Matlanga said to him, if you were given an unlawful instruction to disband, would you have complied with it? And he said no. And then, of course, he had complied with it, and then after the fact said, well, I said that it mustn't be done in this way, that it mustn't be this abrupt decision. It's going to have adverse consequences for the cases that are in court. But Madlanga made it very clear, and he said, you should have said, when you said I wouldn't comply with an unlawful instruction, that you should have qualified that by saying, unless the minister was breathing down my neck. And so, I think that Masemola, just given that line of question, might find himself on, the receiving end of some quite adverse comments in terms of him protecting an independence that he had fiercely advocated for in the beginning of this hearing.
The success rate of the task team itself has also been an ongoing sort of questioning. There's been this detailing of sort of how many cases it had at the beginning of 2025. I think it was more than 600. The conviction rate has been touted by the National Commissioner as the sort of measure of success for the team, and while he thought that it should sort of continue in his view, because he believes that the buck sort of stops with him and not anyone else other than the president in order for its longevity. What convinced essentially Masemola that the task team itself is quote unquote unmatched, as he put it, Karyn?
Well, I mean, that story changed somewhat. So Mkhwanazi, during his press conference, said that the PKTT had obtained 106 convictions. In his evidence today, Masemola says there were 297 cases that were finalized, which means that those 106 convictions came from 297 cases that were resolved either in acquittals, convictions, or alternative dispute resolution, and that means the conviction rate was about 35%. Masemola said he wasn't sure about the conviction, but what he did stress was that this unit took on cases that he described as dead. And he said, these guys would come in and these previously dormant cases where there had been no movement for years would become resolved, and there would be movement on them. Not necessarily conviction, because he wasn't sure about those rates. And I think that is, Graeme, going to be a subject matter of fierce contestation. We know that the NPA has also come out in support of the unit and said that, there were impressive achievements linked to the way in which it did prosecutor-led investigations. But he said for Masemola, the key issue was that a lot of those cases were essentially dead in the water, and this unit effectively revived them.
And notwithstanding the conviction rate, of course, cases take varying amounts of time within the courts themselves to move up and down, right? Very interestingly, one of the strongest proponents for the task team several months before the disbandment letter over the New Year's from 2024 to 2025 had come in, which is such a focal point of the Commission of Inquiry's sort of questioning, was former Police Minister Mbeki. Yeah, himself has sort of been revealed as somebody who was very quick and eager to support and celebrate the task team's work.
Absolutely. And he had actually given a letter in support. It was actually a media address. In 2023, when he was the police minister, he had been outspoken at an interministerial committee engagement where he had given a press conference and essentially said this unit is immensely successful. And of course, now the profound irony of him, through the excellent work done by our colleague Jeff Wicks, being the person with multiple missed calls to Kat Matlala after Mkhunazi's press conference, and then apparently having been given, luxury accommodation from him. So, it's quite a contrast. And I think that's, it's a profound contrast that Bheki Cele 2023 is celebrating the work of the PKTT. And now, all these years later, in an inquiry about its disbandment, is being, there's going to be evidence emerging through the work of our colleagues that, there was this potential attachment to one of the linchpin figures who, according to Nhlanhla Mkhunazi, was at the heart of the so-called criminal infiltration of our legal system, our law enforcement system.
Masemola came back after lunch and then dropped this quite alarming allegation that it's Deputy National Top Cop Shadrack Sibiya, who was quote-unquote allegedly friends or has been friends with Tender Don Vusimusi Kat Matlala, but this is according to a confidential tip-off that he gotten, right?
And this was one of the more interesting aspects here because it came through and it wasn't clear to me, but the suggestion seemed to be that this quote-unquote concerned party was someone who may or may not have been involved in that whole kind of underworld or that sphere of existence, because I think the quote that he made was that, he was, Kat Matlala was whoever this person was, his or her deputy, and, that he or she was aware of this interaction. And that's why, in relation to a investigation into a kidnapping, this person did not want Shadrack Sibiya to be put in a position to do the case because of this alleged friendship with Kat Matlala. And, Graeme, you will know better than me, but I don't think that allegation has emerged. And it was certainly not something that Mkhunazi said during his testimony. But now, through the mouth of our National Commissioner of Police, he's essentially said that he and Khumalo, General Dumisani Khumalo, who himself is facing charges over the allegedly corrupt appointment of a 29-year-old BMW employee to a very senior position within crime intelligence, allegedly utilizing a faked CV, that they were the people that went to Mkhunu and said, we believe that, Shadrack Sibiya is potentially associating with and implicated and linked to this alleged criminal syndicate activity. And of course, we haven't had any evidence to substantiate that. And, as much was admitted during subsequent questioning by evidence leader Terry Mutau of Masemola. But, that's going to, create a further sort of public dent in our sense of the leadership of the police, whether or not Shadrack Sibiya is cleared of those allegations or not.
Another focal point before we end off, Karyn, has of course been about the case of the mistaken identity in the hit on FAL engineer Armand Swart, connected to his firm sort of blowing the whistle on alleged corruption at Transnet in the manufacturing of a spring, in which it was by their costs a lot less to what the sort of middlemen down the line was sort of inflating to get a bigger turnout of this seemingly corrupt tender. In that case, of course, many of the figureheads allegedly part of KT Katiso Molefe's alleged death squad, in inverted commas, are the sort of suspects that through ballistics reports have been linked to numerous other cases. So it was very much a breakthrough for the task team going ahead and for police in general. Here it comes Masemola again, backing up what Mkhunazi is saying, that say, have a look at the courts here, because they had to deal with a lot of issues of threats and bribes during this time.
Yes, and this was something that was sort of like a beginning part of Masemola's evidence, where he said, a number of the original team that was investigating that whole issue, it was reduced from 5 to 2 because of the levels of threats. And he said, you can't, he made a comment to the effect of, you can't always expect everyone to just be brave, and suggested that because of the relentless nature of the threats, and because a police member, Mr. Tao, was granted bail because of alleged health problems, there was a great deal of anxiety anxiety amongst investigators. And that, of course, is so pivotal, Graeme, because that's the issue that then leads Khumalo to deploy 10 members of the PKTT to that Gauteng counterintelligence operation to then take on this investigation and then seize these firearms. And through their own investigation, which Mkhwanazi said was initially kind of almost undermined by a police forensic investigation that proved no links to anything, and then do their own investigation, which he says then results in all these links to multiple other high-profile crimes. He's, essentially saying that that's what leads this the PKTT to come into this this Gauteng team, and that, of course, is what he argues Mkhwanazi contends. Not so much Masemola. He's just been sort of giving the background to everything that happened to the PKTT being disbanded.
Right. Karyn, as we end off now and throw forward to what we may expect from day 2 of Masemola's testimony, there's been a lot of friction, Masemola details between him and Sibiya about taking certain directives in regards to what the minister was asking in terms of the disbandment of the task team. What did we find out here?
My understanding was that Sibiya had actually produced a letter where he'd essentially said that the dockets must all be handed over. Basically what had happened was that, there'd been the production of this report by Masemola and Khumalo, who then said, look, we have misgivings. These are the implications. These are the complaints that have been made against this unit. These are the consequences of what's going to happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they then produced that and provided to Mkhunu. But what was interesting, Graeme, was that Masemola said that he found it quite disconcerting that Sibiya had asked for a closing report where he was seeking kind of explanations that Masemola felt should have been asked right before the decision was made to disband the unit. And he said, he found it just very strange that was something that was being queried now. And didn't understand that. So I think, what else is extraordinary with all of this is that if this evidence is to be, is correct and it's all under oath, then you had this extraordinary situation where the National Commission of Police, who's operationally in charge of the running of the police, suspected that his deputy was involved with organized criminals from January this year and was, basically disrupting a team that he believed was doing this pivotal work alongside the General Crime Intelligence General Khumalo. And they're briefing the minister and saying, your deputy is implicated in organized crime in January. And it takes several months only for Mkhwanazi to then have that bombshell press conference, and all of this emerges. So, I think that's also going to give a lot of people a lot of pause for thought about how the police deal with these issues, because either that's a political hit job that's being done on someone and Sibiya is completely innocent and this is just a part of the cut and thrust of factional politics in the police, or there was a reasonable apprehension that this was indeed true, but he was kept in the position anyway because there was a complete failure to investigate and attain certainty. Either of those possibilities are extremely scary.
After Masemola, do you think you'd wrap up by tomorrow before the public holiday? And do you have any inkling as to who we may expect next?
My understanding is that he'll finish by lunch tomorrow, and then there's going to be someone who's sort of testifying about operational issues. And then, we will potentially go into possibly crime intelligence boss Dumisani Khumalo himself, where we've had a very strong suggestion that there will be an application for certain aspects of his evidence to be held in camera, specifically, Graeme, in relation to the so-called Big Five, these criminals who are allegedly, implicated in massive syndicate activities in South Africa.
For somebody who's not aware, Karyn, just before I let you go, if it is done in camera, does that mean that certain aspects of his testimony is thus redacted from the final report in terms of what the recommendations imply of the Commission's work once it's wrapped up?
I think that what will happen is that the witnesses who testify that will not be identified and that names of people involved will be redacted. But I think that there will be an overall commitment to transparency from the inquiry, because they'll want to explain how they reached their determinations in reaching, the decisions that they did. What I'm particularly interested in, Graeme, is to see whether Fannie Masemola repeats Mkhonazi's attacks on the criminal IDAC cases,
Yes.
the investigating directorate cases against Khumalo and those fellow very senior people in crime intelligence. We haven't heard any hint of that. We know that he did supply an application an affidavit in support of them in the criminal proceedings. But is he going to go as far as Mkhonazi did and to allege, without providing any real evidence at this point, that the IDAC, which is an independent, NPA body who's meant to protect, to investigate high-level corruption and state capture corruption, that they were somehow doing those cases at the behest of a drug cartel. And I will be interested to see if the National Commissioner repeats those allegations, because if he does, then I think we've been looking at a profound law enforcement crisis in this country.
Right, because that's, just to end off now, that's been one of the major claims made by Mkhonazi, where we felt as, particularly as a newsroom go, we're not quite sure about that, especially. That needs to be tested. We need to see follow-up testimony and evidence brought in this regard to hear the other side of the story, right?
Well, remember the state capture inquiry never looked at ongoing cases that were in court. And there was always a real sense, there was never an instance in which that investigation jeopardized criminal prosecutions. Now you have senior people within crime intelligence who are essentially being able to use this forum to effectively undermine within public imagination the legitimacy of a prosecution against them. And you may well find a scenario where Kat Matlala turns around and says, but I've already been so thoroughly discredited in the court of public opinion, how can I possibly have a fair trial? So there are implications beyond this. And I think that we are going to have to seriously tussle with that, because I think I certainly have a grave deal of disquiet about the way in which quite serious allegations, including against Shadrack Sibiya, are being ventilated in a forum where we don't really sense what the evidence supporting them is. And while I understand that this is part of, the in-camera, out-of-camera dimension of this whole thing, I think that there, specifically against someone like DAMP Diane Kohler-Barnard, someone like her would be perfectly within her rights to be extremely unhappy, as will the Inspector General of Intelligence, as will Fadil Adams, and indeed as will Andrea Johnson, with two or three of her cases being undermined in this way.
I just want to know if Karyn Maughan's got enough snacks for the week ahead.
I had no snacks today. I ran out of snacks. That's why I'm grumpy.
Oh, I didn't pick it up in your tone, by the way. Hint, hint.
No, it's just because it's you, Graeme.
Of course, if you're tired of listening to our voices and you want to go see it in black and white, you can go and read our live blog with all the updates from Karyn Maughan as well as her colleague Bernadette Wicks. The latest being Masemola says he briefed Mqunu about Sibiya's quote-unquote involvement and association with criminal syndicates is one of the latest sort of headlines to come out from the Commission's proceedings in central Pretoria today. Karyn, hope you keep well. Thank you so much for today, and we'll pick it up again tomorrow.
Bring the snacks, Graeme. Bring the snacks. Thank you.
Trending topic.
Shifting gears to our trending topic, and there's such a severe lack of learning materials in Mpumalanga that teachers at 4 schools in Bushbuck Ridge are now forced to photocopy old textbooks just to get by. Yet the local education department has spent 1.6 billion rand since 2022 buying digital tablets for grade 12 pupils. Now, according to our specialist education journalist, Brega Governor, researchers found that photocopying so many pages has cost these schools dearly. Soon, though, grade 10 pupils will form part of the tablet handout program as well. In the meantime, though, some Mpumalanga schools report receiving too many workbooks, a wasteful spend, and too few textbooks to learn from. Now, there are calls from opposition parties for the billions spent on tablets to rather be used on new textbooks instead. But the provincial department insists that the root cause of the shortage remains schools' difficulties in retrieving these pupils' books at the end of the academic year. Some of you in the News 24 comments section, though, fear that a tender rat may be to blame for the apparent overindulgence in buying these digital tablets.
buying a car? Let Driving with J9 steer you right.
The reason why I wanted you in today is because I want to talk about car sales. You were in that space for a few years as a salesman.
News 24's motoring podcast, hosted by Janine van der Post, delivers sharp car advice, expert test drives.
Nowadays, when somebody, for the most part, when somebody walks into a dealership, they know sometimes more about the car than the salesperson does because of the access to information.
Yeah.
The latest trends and motorsport interviews, all in one smooth ride.
But I mean, these are basic questions that people really need to know. And I think at the end of the day, you just really need to do your homework.
Catch Driving with J9 on News 24 or wherever you get your podcasts. And finally,
ending off now with On This Day in History, the 22nd of September 2008. While South Africa at the time had faced a dramatic shift in political leadership. Just a day prior, President Thabo Mbeki at the time had resigned under pressure from his own party, the ANC. Parliament had convened and formally accepted his resignation on this day in history, clearing the way for a new head of state. The fallout was immediate. 11 cabinet ministers and 3 deputy ministers had quit in solidarity with Mbeki, sending shockwaves through the political establishment. Now, days later, MPs cast their votes in a secret ballot, and the ANC's candidate, Graeme Raubenheimer, had triumphed with 269 votes, defeating the DA's Joe Seremane. Now, on 25th of September, Matlala was sworn in as South Africa's third president of its democratic era. That's courtesy South African History Online on this day in history, the 22nd of September 2008. Just a note to say, we'll only be broadcasting one more show for this week. That's tomorrow, Tuesday's edition, before the upcoming public holiday. The following show's episode 111 will come on Monday, the 29th of September. But how's your preparation going for Wednesday's Braais? Let us know what you're doing this Heritage Day. You can send us a voice note on 072 562 3179. Send us a mail if you'd like at thelead@24.com. And to be reminded of each episode, hit the follow, like and subscribe buttons on Spotify, Apple and YouTube to be notified of the next edition. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have the lead.